Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again, it is Sunday, and that means it's time for the Texas Gun Vault Poll Question of the week. It is the day after Christmas, so I thought we would have a Christmas-themed question for you guys. Now, I posted this on my community tab of my YouTube channel over a week ago, leading up to Christmas, and it's about toy guns. Now, this can kind of be a hot button issue for some people. Some anti-gunners and politicians say toy guns are gateways to gun violence and people wanting real guns. Some people think they're kind of neutral. They're just toys. Who cares? And some people think they're a great way to introduce young kids into responsible gun ownership. But I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. But before we get to your responses, let's read this week's question. With Christmas happening in a few days, I thought I would ask something relating to the holiday for this week's question. So, with children anxiously anticipating getting new toys, how do you feel about toy guns? Many anti-gunners say that giving children toy guns is a gateway to them wanting real ones one day. Many toy drives also discourage toy guns from being donated. So how do you feel about this issue? Are toy guns good, neutral, or bad for the future of the Second Amendment? Now, for me personally, there's 4 categories of guns. I don't think that you can just say toy guns and use it as a blanket statement. And let me explain what I mean. Well, first off, there are toy guns that shoot projectiles and toy guns that don't. And then there are toy guns that look absolutely ridiculous, like this Nerf blaster right here. And then there are toy guns that really look like real guns. And so you can kind of have a mix and match of those 4 categories. So sometimes you could have a gun like this that looks ridiculous but shoots a projectile, or you can have a gun that looks real that does absolutely nothing, or a gun that looks real and does shoot a projectile. And I think that depending on the type of toy gun we're talking about, different rules apply. But before I talk about each one of those, let's see what you guys have to say with this week's results. With over 1,200 votes this week, as of me filming this video, we have good. They are a way to promote safe firearms handling and the 2A, 40%. Neutral, they are just toys, they are harmless, 45%. Bad, they glorify guns, violence, and criminality, 1%. Toy gun, I'm giving my kids a real gun for Christmas, 11%. And something else, explain in the comments, 2%. So, let's go back and talk about what I was mentioning just before about these different categories of toy guns. You know, there's something in robotics called the uncanny valley. And the uncanny valley is when you create a robot that looks like a human, and the closer you get it to looking like a human, people that see that particular robot get a sense of uneasiness. It's very easy for us to see a robot like from Star Wars and see C-3PO and not really get too weirded out. But then there are other types of robots that really look and express themselves like real human beings. Often, people kind of get a little bit queasy about that. And this is a very known psychological effect about the way that our brains process information and what we assume an object is based off of its looks. Now, while we don't have an uncanny valley, meaning an uneasy feeling when it comes to guns, I do believe that the closer a gun looks to being real, the rules should change. So for example, if you have a gun that looks absolutely ridiculous and is multicolored and does not shoot a projectile. Now this is a Nerf gun and this one does shoot a projectile, but let's just pretend it didn't. Well, I look at this as a completely harmless gun, the type of toy gun that you could let any kid have. They might go around going pew pew, but the people that see them doing this aren't going to be too worried. Nobody would ever mistake this as a firearm, something that is dangerous. And because it doesn't shoot a projectile at all, everything is imaginary in the child's mind. This is something that is completely harmless, and I feel that you can give to any child. You don't have to say much to them, and you can let them go about living out their Space Ranger fantasies. However, when it comes to a Nerf gun like this that does shoot a projectile, well, rules have to start coming into play. And this is where I think toy guns can be used as a good analog to teach responsible gun handling. But they're not perfect in doing that, because obviously a Nerf gun's main design is to have a Nerf gun fight where you get around with your friends and you shoot these little foam projectiles at each other. Nobody's going to get hurt. So the rules of gun safety don't all apply. Obviously, when it comes to a real gun, you never want to point the gun at anything you don't want to kill or destroy. But when it comes to a Nerf gun, it's completely okay in the right circumstances. But then we also, as I mentioned, have guns that look very real. And even ones that wouldn't shoot a projectile at all, I would recommend learning how to carry those guns appropriately. You have to explain to a kid, if you're going to carry around that realistic looking M16 rifle, sure, maybe it has a little orange tip, but that can be painted over or fall off, and you're going to go run around the neighborhood, you gotta be careful because some of those toys look really realistic. And there have been news stories where kids have accidentally gotten shot by the police because the police assumed they were carrying real guns. So when it comes to a gun like that, it absolutely is imperative that you teach some of the rules of gun safety, because you want to make sure, of course, you don't point that at anybody or anything you don't want to destroy, even though it doesn't shoot a projectile. Why? Because the perception of the people you're pointing it at, well, it can raise a lot of alarm bells. And when it comes to a gun that looks real, well, you want to develop good habits early on. So if a gun looks real or feels real, well, if you're used to being very aware of where that muzzle is pointed, whenever you're handed a real firearm, well, you're going to make sure that you're safe and treat it exactly the same way. Then we have the guns that I think are kind of on the borderline. Some people would call them toys, some people call them replica firearms, and these are the things that are like airsoft or even pellet guns. Now these are guns that can look like real guns and shoot a projectile. Granted, they're probably not lethal, but you're dealing with essentially an item that can scare people just by its looks and can shoot a projectile that could potentially harm people. And I think depending on the age of the child in question, the different types of guns kind of come into play, and you can introduce them at different times and teach them different aspects of firearm safety. So obviously you want to wait to the very later stages of a child's development to give them an airsoft gun or a pellet gun. But even an airsoft gun has a little bit of gray area, because there are people that, just like Nerf guns, go out in the woods and play airsoft. Essentially, you have very realistic looking guns that shoot these little tiny foam pellets. And that's safe, but it has to be done in the right environment. So let's go through each one of these and I'll give you guys my personal opinions. We have good. They are a way to promote safe firearms handling and the Second Amendment. Well, I believe when it comes to older kids, I'm going to say maybe early teens to being an adult, I think this is a great way to go. In fact, I even know some people that take replica guns that are those kind of plastic molded guns, and when they're teaching people about gun safety, they have them hold them and say, hey, these are the rules. You can't put the muzzle and point it towards anybody, finger off the trigger, and you just let them do what they're going to do. And if you see them point the gun at anybody or put their finger in the trigger guard, you can easily correct them, but you know they're not ready to be stepped up to a real firearm. Now, when it comes to the youngest of kids, as I said, having the guns that look absolutely nothing like real firearms, that's probably the way to go. So I would say the youngest kids, guns that don't even look like guns, that don't shoot projectiles, is the way to go. You don't really have to worry too much about gun safety unless they come up to somebody and point the gun in their face and go pew, pew, pew. Well, that's when you want to step in and go, well, that's not the correct way to do it. That's very impolite, it's wrong, and don't be rude. And then as they get older, maybe you trust them with a Nerf gun, well, they're going to learn the consequences of pointing that Nerf gun and maybe shooting their older sibling at the wrong time, and they're going to realize that every action has consequences. Then we have neutral, they are just toys, they are harmless. Now, if I was voting in this poll, this is the way that I would have gone, because I look at them just like video games. There are many video games out there that are pretty violent. There's a lot of cursing in them. You can go and rob banks, you can kill people, you can run people over with cars, you can pick up ladies of the night and go and kill them. Yes, in games like Grand Theft Auto 5. But because these games exist, do we see a huge rash of teenagers going out with their cars and running people over? No, because there is a disconnect between what is fictional and what is reality. Now, most healthy people can see a violent movie or a violent video game and not affect them in any way, shape, or form. Now, there is always the exception to the rule. But I'm speaking in generalities here. And so when I think it comes to toy guns, they are just neutral. They're not going to hurt anybody. I've seen kids love to play with toy guns, and then when they grow up, have no interest at all in firearms. In fact, my kids are like this. They have a whole closet full of these Nerf guns. It's where I got this thing from. And they used to play Nerf War all the time. But really, only one of my sons is interested in firearms at all. The other three really don't care much. Yeah, they might go to the range with me, but their interest in firearms is not very strong. But man, oh man, did they like the Nerf gun. So it wasn't a gateway. It was just a fun toy to play with. They knew it was fiction. They knew that when they shot these foam projectiles at each other, they weren't going to hurt anybody. But they also know real gun safety, and they know what a gun can do. And they would never point a gun at anybody else. And they know that I watch them like a hawk at the range, and I'm always making sure that they're safe. And to their credit, I'm very proud of them. They know all the rules of gun safety and follow them really well. Then we have bad. They glorify guns, violence, and criminality. Now, I'm not surprised at all because of the demographics of my channel and who watches my channel, but only 1% of people said this. Now, I know if this was a vote across a larger population of non-gun owners or people that consume firearms content on YouTube or Rumble, that this number might be a little bit higher. They assume that just because there is a toy gun, that means it's a gateway drug to more violence, that you're going to want to have a real gun, you're going to want to go around and shoot people, and you're not going to respect life. I don't really get it. As I said, we have many examples elsewhere where we can say we see sexualization or violence in television and movies and video games, and we don't see that necessarily correlate to society. Then we have toy gun. I'm giving my kids a real gun for Christmas. Now, I definitely think that if you're in the position and your child is old enough and most importantly, responsible enough, I think getting them either some type of pellet gun or maybe some type of easy .22 rifle to shoot is the way to go. Now, you keep possession of it, but when you go to the range, you bring your kid out and you go, well, this is your gun, and when you're old enough, you can have it. But until then, we're only going to shoot it here at the range. You have to shoot it under my supervision, and I'm going to teach you how to safely operate and maintain this firearm. It teaches them responsibility, but also gives them something to look forward to if being a firearms owner is something that is important to them. I think this is the way to go, but it has to be the right kid at the right time with the right parents. But this is how I know a lot of people got into firearms, and this is how I think that we secure the Second Amendment for generations to come. Because if you get into firearms safely and responsibly at a young age, well, you plant those seeds that are going to grow for generations to come, as I mentioned. And then we have something else. Explain in the comments, 2%. Now, most of the comments that I read, I don't know what they were looking at or going to write, because pretty much every comment that I saw dealt with one of those other 4 topics. But with that said, let's dive right in to this week's top-rated comments. And our top-rated comment of the week comes from A. Jones23, who says, well, growing up in the 70s, I had lots of toy guns. Now I have lots of respect and responsibility for firearms. I've taught my son the same thing, and he turned out fine. So yes, it's good for children to learn about firearms through toy guns. And I agree, if you use them as an educational object, Well, that's probably the way to go. You move them up, and when they're ready, you give them a pellet gun, an airsoft gun, and then finally their own firearm. And then you've instilled in them good, safe, responsible gun ownership and habits. Then we have Mr. FNH, who says, I played with toy guns when I was young and have gifted toy guns to my children in the past. I look forward to gifting them firearms one day when they're much older. Man, can I be one of your sons? I'd like to get a gift of a firearm. All right, then we got Joe Morgan. I loved getting a toy gun on Christmas. When I got older, say in my early teens, I loved getting ammo for the real guns. I worked hard to buy. Well, that's great too. Who's going to turn down free ammo, free gun food? But yeah, as you can see from these comments, some people are really excited and talk about how those toy guns led them to being safe and responsible gun owners today. Then we have Taddus Legion 78, who says, if I'm giving a kid a toy gun for Christmas, I'd make them treat it like a real gun. And I agree. But as I said, going back to those different categories of gun, I think it kind of depends on the type of gun it is, and you teach them situational awareness. So the Nerf gun, while the rule of gun safety is you never point this at anything you don't want to kill or destroy, well, if you're having a Nerf gun fight with those foam pellets, well, it's okay to point this at somebody. But of course, if you had an airsoft gun or a pellet gun, that is a no-go. So it's kind of situational, and you have to be the judge of that. And then finally, we have Grrr6637, who says, a pellet gun is a good way to introduce kids to the world of firearms. And it looks like the top-rated comments of this week all say guns are fantastic gateways to responsible and safe firearm handling and ownership. So there you go. That is the Texas Gun Vault poll question of the week. The results really don't surprise me too much, but I know my audience. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, I invite you also to check out my Rumble channel. Rumble is a competitor to YouTube. I have a channel over there. I will put a link in the description below. You can also check out my second channel here on YouTube. It's kind of a behind the scenes channel. It's very casual. I talk about upcoming content. And if you like the content that I am producing, feel free in joining me over on Patreon. YouTube has demonetized my channel. So all the content I make, from the range reports to these types of videos, well, it's all on my dime. And trust me, this is a lot of time and a lot of money goes into ammunition. But if you just want to like my video, share it with others, that is also fantastic as well. So there you go. The Texas Gun Vault poll question of the week. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section below, and go check out my community tab on my YouTube channel so you guys can check out next week's poll, vote, comment, and like other people's comments so we can get the top rated comments of the week. So as always, thanks for watching.